Things started. Let me come to you, Caleb Maupin. Today, July 4th, 2012, Independence Day, the day that America is celebrating its birthday in that regards. Does the U.S. or Americans have reasons to celebrate this day?
Well, I think there are many parts of the history of the United States that are definitely worth celebrating. For example, people often talk about the U.S. Revolution in 1776, but they don't realize we had a second revolution to end slavery, when the people of this country rose up and fought against slavery, and there was a heroic revolution that ended the slaveocracy in the South. That was the Second American Revolution. There's strong traditions of organized labor, of people organizing for the rights of women, of mass demonstrations, of people organizing, being involved and fighting against the 1%. So those are traditions we can certainly be proud of. But this notion that the U.S. is the greatest country in the world and has the right to go around, bombing and destroying other people's countries, that's not anything to celebrate. And the idea that we're the freest country in the world, this freedom didn't come from the 1% giving it to us. It came from the fact that people poured into the streets numerous times and won that freedom through mass rallies, through mass demonstrations. The Bill of Rights wasn't even originally in the Constitution. It took a popular struggle to win it. And if we want to have freedom, the struggle to expand freedom has always been a struggle against the 1%, the bosses and the bankers who would really like all of us to silently march behind them in obedience. And so if we're going to celebrate anything about the history of this country, it's people's refusal to go along with it. It's the spirit of the civil rights marchers, the spirits of the Black Panthers, the spirits of the Trade Union Unity League, the spirits of all the revolutionary organizations who have fought against the 1%. And it's the hope that we could have another revolution at some point and get rid of this 1%, who talk about freedom when in reality they want to take away our rights, and they continue to let the country slip into poverty. This could be an inspiring day to study the history of this country and look forward to the hope that we can get rid of the 1% and free the people of the world, not just of the United States, from the tyranny of the bankers and corporations.
And of course, freedom is something that has been under question, especially with the Occupy movement, which went public in November. Caleb Maupin, I'd like to bring you in on this. How do you think the U.S. government has done in terms of reaching out to the masses who have come out in droves, and not only in terms of the Occupy movements, but in all different facets of their life that's being affected, when there's record numbers of U.S. Americans who are, for example, on food stamps, or, for example, that are being evicted, these foreclosures that we keep hearing about, the numbers, record numbers?
Well, there's all this rhetoric we constantly hear in the United States, from television, from the media, in schools. Everywhere we hear it, the U.S. is a free country and it's a democracy and you should just blindly wave the flag because you're free. But this isn't a democracy when so many people are suffering and there's so much economic misery. It's not a democracy when people are losing their homes. It's not a democracy when so many people are barely have enough to eat and are depending on food stamps to survive. That's not democracy. That's not democracy. And democracy is really inconsistent with a system where you have 1%, a small group of people that has all the wealth and all the power and controls the government. That's not consistent with democracy. And if we actually want to see democracy and have a system where the people control society, and not just an elite, but actually the people, that would require abolishing capitalism. The 1%, the bankers and the corporations, they own all the wealth that all of us in the United States and around the world have created. They own the profits from the labor, from the work that we do. So if we're going to see a real democracy and want to actually see this democracy and have it not just be something that they scream and have it be this rhetoric they scream at us, if we want to have it be a real thing, that's going to require getting rid of the 1% and getting rid of the capitalist system. The struggle for democracy is a struggle against capitalism, and it's also a struggle against the wars, because the war is waged around the world. The threats of war on Syria, the threats of war against Iran, the brutal bombing of Libya, it's all rooted in the desire of this 1% to make profits. It's a people's struggle against a 1% of bankers and corporations who have all the power, and if we want to see democracy, if we want to see that for real, we have to bring them down, and we have to have a real democracy where the people are in control, and that requires the abolition of the capitalist system.
Well, Caleb Maupin talks about democracy the U.S. President Obama made, and that was back in November 2011. It was at a fundraiser in which Barack Obama warned that the U.S. was headed down a perilous path if its leaders, and I say, underline the word leaders, if its leaders cannot move quickly and responsibly. This was in reference to getting people back to work. Has that changed? I mean, what we have seen in terms of leaders has been, well, the bickering between Democrats and Republicans, like on the debt ceiling, if you recall, and also more recently, Obamacare.
Well, the U.S. is certainly headed down a perilous path because, you know, all this rhetoric about freedom, look what happens around this country when people actually try to use that freedom. They get caught in orange nets, they get their heads clubbed in by police, and they get maced. And now, with these laws that have been passed, the National Defense Authorization Act, I mean, that's a horrific law that, you know, makes any notion of freedom kind of a joke if the president has the right to detain you without any charges. So yes, the country is headed in a dangerous path, and it's because of the economic system of capitalism having a meltdown. And as that's happening, many more people are going to try and use the freedom that they have to pour into the streets and demand economic justice. And when that happens, the 1% is desperately going to try to clamp down and make sure that people's voices are not heard. And that's why we're headed in a perilous path. It's rooted in the economic system of capitalism and its fundamental meltdown. And they may be moving toward the gradual abolition of democracy in order to preserve their wealth from the millions of people who would take it away from them and create a real democracy in the streets.